It was a labor of love. Like in my life, I read a lot, I think a lot. I am kind of a human encyclopedia in the sense of understanding the whole enchilada, all the stuff around me, and have developed a kind of a niche of seeing what's going to happen next that's really guided my career in one role after another. And I had brought my prior role to sort of fruition, and I was thinking, what's the next big thing that I think is going to happen? That next big thing was the rise of Asia. So I started thinking, I would like the opportunity to play a role in that and to experience that. The SK opportunity came along, bright people, interesting science, very long history of frustration, which as I thought it through, I realized was due to the wrong strategy. And so I took it on as the opportunity to deepen my earlier experience in Asia and play my part in helping to move the company forward from being an innovator company. I think that for Korea, that's the next stage that the Korean economy has to overcome. And in that sense, I felt like this was my W. Edward Deming's moment of trying to teach people how to be innovative, something that I've spent my whole life doing. So that's how I came to be here, and it went spectacularly well. I was really pleased. The fundamental drivers are two things. It's really economics. How many people do you have, and how much do they earn per capita? Europe population intrinsically is declining. It'll lose 100 million people in the next 20 years. American population is basically flat. There's going to be more than 1 billion people added in Asia over the next 20 years, and it's already the most populous area in the world. In terms of per capita income, while Europe and the United States have adapted sort of income redistribution as their model and are basically stagnant in terms of having very low growth rates, Asia has adopted much more of an attitude of economic freedom. They've moved greatly forward. Initially with Taiwan, Singapore, Hong Kong, South Korea, Japan, the Asian tigers feeding into the US market predominantly. But now, in more recent years, India to some degree and China to a great degree have moved forward. And as a result, their per capita earnings are increasing at a great level. When you have a lot of people and you increase your per capita earnings at 8% a year, that leads to an enormous expansion of your economic value. For our industry, our market is essentially the middle class. People who are very poor are spending their money on food, shelter, clothing. Their healthcare tends to be generic, depending on the insurance of the area. The rich, there's not enough of them to ever pay for the development of therapy. So it takes people who earn enough money and whose lives are good enough that it's worth spending that money on better healthcare to actually provide the market for the creation of innovator therapeutics. Right now, that market, the middle class buying power in the world, is predominantly in the United States, Western Europe, and Japan. But they will remain relatively stagnant for the next 20 years, whereas Asian buying power, which is currently less than the United States, will eventually increase about sixfold over the next 20 years, which will basically triple the size of the global pharma market, which is an event that doesn't happen often, maybe every few centuries, that you get such a rapid rate of growth for such an already large industry. The fundamental cause of the tough years that pharma has faced was based on an error in thinking. Beginning in the 1990s, pharma embraced, because of the rise of genomics, the hope that we would find many new targets out of it, a model of target-oriented therapeutics where some scientist would come up with an interesting mechanism, you would develop a therapeutic against it and hope that it had a great effect. This worked reasonably well in areas where it was possible to understand the logic of the particular area, say oncology or infectious disease, where essentially the whole disease process happens within the single cell. In much larger markets like CNS, for example, where we have 10 to the 10 cells and 10 to the 13 connections, and they're all firing many times a second, it's a tad more complicated than that. That model did not apply. So what happened essentially is that pharma did well in oncology, did reasonably well in infectious disease, but in huge markets that are complex diseases like inflammatory disease and CNS, and cardiovascular for that matter, we essentially completely dropped the ball. When you have the failure of the industry to produce drugs for the very largest markets that affect by far the greatest number of prescriptions, no surprise that your industry is troubled. So I think the fundamental problem was with R&D, and the solution to that is to move away from the thought error of adopting an ideology of discovery, target-oriented therapeutics, and applying it willy-nilly to areas where it doesn't apply, and instead adopt better strategies, as we did at SKPP, using pathophysiologic screening.
What does the rise of Asia mean to biopharma?
I think that the rise of Asia means that you're going to have an enormously larger market, and that if biopharma and pharma, for that matter, can't manage to succeed over the next 20 years in an environment where you're going to have a 6-fold increase in the size of the market in Asia. We're going to have a 3-fold increase over all of our markets. If we can't succeed with a 3-fold increase over 20 years, we should be replaced, because this is going to be, for biopharma, the opportunity of a lifetime. The first key, I think, is to understand your mission, why it is you're doing what you're doing, be very clear about what success would look like, and be organized about what goals you have to hit. From there, the next step is to think through, in a ruthlessly facts and logic-oriented way, exactly how the world works, and exactly what the opportunities are, what the problems are. From that, you abstract the diagnoses. These are the main challenges, and the guiding principles. These are the solutions to those challenges. And from those concepts of how you're going to deal with them, you derive a detailed action plan, which you enact, you put into play, always looking at what happens as your plan plays out, figuring out where it's going wrong, and then, in the words, I think, of the Marines, improvise, adapt, and overcome, and dealing with it. I think that for pharma, parts of our change will include better strategies for how we do discovery in the areas that are not susceptible to target-oriented therapeutics to the same degree. It'll include a way of marketing our products that works better, that takes advantage of new technologies, social media, things like that, rather than just bombarding physicians with 50 details from a day from different people. And the key challenge, which is the fact that in Asia, it's going to be largely a branded generics priced market. Pharma has traditionally disdained branded generic price markets because the margin was not as good. However, it means that if you pay attention to your cost of manufacture, so you can make money at that, the fact that it's branded generics is more than made up for by the fact that your target population is going to be 10 times larger than your current population. This will require a lot of change of thinking in commercial. So at the discovery, the implementation and strategy, and the commercial levels, we need better strategies. But the solution is pretty clear if you think about it.